Hi, Clint. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sherry. I'm so excited to be with you today.
So happy we're speaking today. And I really love your story. And I think your story is a powerful one. And it's definitely super important that we share your message with the world because you're helping people really understand that pain could be something that we can use to create leverage in a positive way. And I think most of us actually spend our entire life trying to avoid pain. And I work with athletes who are overcoming binge eating patterns or out of control eating. And oftentimes the reason for that is because we are actually trying to avoid that pain. And so, Clint, first of all, welcome to the show. I am so happy you're here.
Thank you.
All right, so tell me a little bit about your story. Maybe share with the audience how you got into the space. Today, you are speaking to people, you're coaching people, and helping them get into that space of comfort around their pain. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so I've always had a desire to help people. It really goes back even to the time I was very young. I would say even into my early teenage years. Now, the only scary thing about that was, I didn't have a lot of wisdom back then, and I actually had a pretty rough period of time from my late teens up until probably close to 30 years old, where I had a lot of drug abuse. I even had about a 9 year stretch of doing meth. Now, I was you know a professional salesperson during those years, so I didn't look like the person you typically think of when you hear that. But it doesn't change the fact that I had a lot of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and so there was a lot of that went on. And even though I had this huge desire to help people, I wasn't positioned with the wisdom. My life wasn't really that healthy, and so it was always there, but just didn't really know what to do with it. And then around 31 years old, started getting my life straight, and just completely quit drugs cold turkey. And that's been almost 30 years ago now, and began to just develop myself. To me, that's one thing about being a personal development coach or what you're doing. You got to lead by example. Like if I go to a gym and there's a trainer who is not in shape, I just immediately think you're probably not who I want to, talk to. So I really felt like I needed to develop myself. So I spent a lot of years doing that. And so then eventually I got into, I was a pastor for almost 17 years. So I did a lot within that, because when people hear pastor, there's so many different forms of what that can look like. So not all of them are necessarily coaching or mentoring or speaking. They can have different roles. For me, that's what it was. I coached teams and developed people and did a lot of those things and just loved it. But a few years ago, our lives got completely turned upside down, and it put me on this new journey of wanting to expand who I could help and the type of people that I could reach, that have experienced a lot of pain and loss. And that all evolves around the story. I have three boys. I've been married almost 20 years. I like to say deliriously happily married, because my bride is my best friend. So we've had, really ups and downs like everybody, but really a pretty good life. But my oldest son, his name was Gabriel, and he, at a very young age, got the bug. He flew at about 8 years old with his uncle Danny in a little plane, loved it, just got the bug to want to be a pilot. And then fast forward, by the time he was 16, he actually soloed for the first time before he even had a driver's license, which was crazy. And then here in the United States, the 17 is the youngest you can actually earn your private pilot's license. And he accomplished that. And so he was well on his way. He was living the dream, on his way, taking other courses to become a commercial pilot at 21, because that's the earliest you can do that. And so life was good, and we were watching him just chase his dreams like every parent, wants to see. And then on September 23rd of 2019, he had just dropped off a friend. He took her on a trip back to her school, which was the University of Arkansas. I'm in Dallas, Texas, so that's just a little north of us. And on the return trip, about 20 minutes in, he ran into some unexpected weather, and he suffered from what the NTSB would rule later as spatial disorientation,
Mm.
which basically means you lose your horizon. You think you're going up, you're going down. You think you're right side up, you're upside down. Kobe Bryant, most people are familiar with his story and the helicopter crash. Same exact thing that his pilot suffered from, and he lost his life pursuing his dream. So thank you. And it's exactly what anybody would imagine. It was a devastating blow, changed our life forever. And of course, with that came just an enormous amount of pain. and all those things that go with it. So pain, confusion, really for the first year, even though you consciously know it's real, you're still getting used to the whole calendar year and milestones and birthdays and different things that just constantly remind you how real it is, right? But I think, Sherry, the reason why I'm here with you today and why I'm doing what I'm doing is I feel like I had a foundation
Mm.
that some people just unfortunately don't have. And I'm just very grateful for that when it happened, because I had already worked with so many people over the years who had had a similar kind of loss. And unfortunately, many just don't know how to process through the pain. Just like I'm sure you get a lot of clients, the minute it starts to hurt, they're gone, right? Because they don't know how to push past that. And so, I realized that morning, and this is what I told my boy. I had to tell my two younger boys who were 9 and 13 at the time. I had to tell them what happened and how we were going to walk this out. And that was just simply, I said, listen, there's two ways that we can live this out and deal with our pain. We can choose to focus on just the tragedy side of it, just the death and how he died and the fact that we're, never going to see him again and all those things we're going to miss. And if we do that, we're going to be a shadow of who we were created to be. And our pain is going to dictate our life rather than us telling the pain where to go. And so what we're going to do is we're going to choose life. And what that meant to me, Sherry, was I said, Gabriel, obviously I told you about his accomplishment of becoming a pilot, which, tells you a little bit about him, but he was super energetic, Mr. Adventure. If I create a t-shirt for him with a phrase that everybody loves those nowadays, it would be what's next. He was that kind of a kid, and he was really smart. So you can see some guitars behind me. He actually taught himself to play guitar. He was an amazing photographer. He graduated a year early from high school. He was taking college courses along with all this other stuff. I mean, if he set his mind to something, it was over with. He was going to do it. And so I told the boys, if we're going to honor him, we're going to have pain. The pain is never going to go away. That's not even a good goal. The pain's there because we love him. He's our son or brother. But, if we're going to live for him, then we need to choose to attack life the way he did. And so that's the decision that we made that morning, along with just agreeing together that we were going to grieve this as a family and that we would let each other cry if we needed to cry. If one was mad, we'd let them be mad. And if that meant cussing up a storm or whatever form it took, that was all okay. And we did those two things together, and it really laid a pretty solid foundation for us. Not perfectly, we have not walked this out perfectly, and we've had our ups and downs, but it's guided us to where we are today, and ultimately led me to step out and write the book and do some of the things I'm doing now.
Wow. You are amazing. You are a beautiful light, and I just want to hold space for you for
Mm,
just a moment. And as you were talking, all I could think about was in life, it's a story. We're essentially living a story, and the greater the villain, the
mm,
greater the hero of the story. And I truly believe that things happen for us, and clearly you do too. You're in this space where you're here to share the message with the world, and you're
right.
embracing this pain and teaching people that sitting through this pain, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, allowing yourself to cry, allowing yourself to connect with the true emotion that's there and not try to suppress it, is the
Right.
only way that we can lovingly guide ourselves through that pain. And so you're absolutely incredible for sharing this message, and I have so much that I want to unpack here, and especially just rewinding a little bit in the beginning of your story where you were an addict, and
Mm,
just
yeah.
wanting to understand that part of your life, why you turned to drugs during that time
Mm,
of your life, and
yeah.
was there something that you were trying to avoid? Because as I was listening to you go through this massive trauma, and I know how painful it is to lose somebody you love. I lost my mom a few years ago, and I could only imagine what that would feel like to lose my own child. I also have two girls. And so as you were sharing the story, I was wondering how you chose to face the pain with the history that you had in the
Mm,
past, as opposed to turning to something else that could help you numb it. And so maybe we can rewind a little bit, and maybe you
yeah.
could share a little bit of that part of your life.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm glad you brought that up. Well, so, I feel in general I had a pretty normal childhood. I grew up in sunny Southern California. I was an athlete, played football, played baseball. Generally speaking, I feel like I had a pretty good life. But at around 11 or 12, there was a pretty traumatic series of incidents that happened that definitely shaped how I ended up into drug and alcohol abuse. My parents had been married 25 years at that point. They had me pretty late. So even at 11, they'd already been married over 25 years. And my dad ended up having an affair. He ended up moving out. It got really, really ugly. They had gotten married at 18 and 16. My mom was
Mm,
16. They came from a different generation, obviously, out of the Korean War. And so they were married very young. And my mom, that's all she knew. I mean, she had a career, but that's all she knew relationship wise, and she didn't respond well. She started drinking really heavy, ended up suffering from suicide ideation, and tried to take her life a few times. And a couple of those times, one involving a high speed. We were in a car. She had drank too much, and she was going to take us both out. I mean, she wasn't in her right mind, and we spun at about 60 miles an hour, and just fortunately didn't hit anything and survived. And then another time with a handgun that she was going to take her life. And, it was so really traumatic. Right. And so eventually about 2 years later, they would reconcile. They ended up being married for 65 years. Our relationship ended very well in my adult years. And both my parents actually passed away about 8 years ago now. But it did send me, on a track of drug and alcohol abuse. And I would say that if not for athletics,
mm,
because I played through junior college football until my second year when I had my second catastrophic knee injury, which was another form of trauma. But
mm.
it was the one thing that kept me kind of on track. But I think that's why once I knew my career with football and I hoped to go on to a 4-year university and continue to play and go to school, that was all gone. Then I went into sales, and that's when things got pretty dark for a pretty long period of time. I did meth for 9 years, and
Mm,
again, I was a professional, so only people that I partied with really even knew it, but I knew it, and so I didn't have the right coping mechanism, Sherry, and I can't say that there was any one moment for sure, but I remember I was about 30 years old, and it was the last time I also had a failed marriage during that time. I don't think I mentioned that.
mm.
We were just both a complete train wreck. I was a terrible husband, and I won't even get into her side of it because my part is my part to own.
Right,
But
right.
I was not a good husband. I was not healthy emotionally, any of those things. And so, but one night we both did meth, one more time. We hadn't done it in a while. And I just woke up the next day, Sherry, and I don't know if you want to call it an awakening, an epiphany, whatever you want to call it, but I didn't feel good.
Mm,
I didn't feel like I had the fun time that I used to think I did when I was on that stuff. And I literally just woke up that morning and I'm like, this is not who I want to be. This is not how I want to live. I'm done.
mm.
And I was, and that was it. And I quit. I didn't, and I have a ton of sensitivity to this issue because obviously I had a lot of friends during those years too. Many have chosen rehab, and my point of view on that is just simply do whatever it takes.
Right.
There's no shame in therapy or no shame in going to rehab or whatever. You got to get over it. But for me, it was just I made what I like to call a courageous decision, and that was it. And so I think that opened me up, without having all of those disgusting chemicals in my body. I think I began at that point to grow personally and really want more for myself,
Mm,
which, as is so key.
mm.
People around you that love you can want the best for you, but if you don't want the best for you, you're always going to be limited. So that's kind of how that all started. And then for me, I I wasn't really a person of faith prior to that either. And when I was about 31 years old, in my case, I became a Christian. And for me, that was, it was a turning point. It was a point where I really felt like I started to have much healthier thought patterns. And, you know, um, my love for people probably became a little more pure and just positioned me, I felt like, to start living my dream and help people and actually have something of value to bring to the table.
Right. Yeah. I think once we get to that place where we have that epiphany moment or that enlightenment, it's really the moment we choose life. We
Mm,
choose this
yeah,
excitement and joy around life, and we actually want to live, and we want to live out our purpose, whatever that means to anybody. And so
yeah,
it's this feeling of wanting to live to the max amount that kind of prevents us from continuing to numb ourselves from these substances. And so inspiring, because that's definitely not a story that we commonly hear, especially with a substance like that. And so
right.
and coming back to just learning how to cope with your emotions, I guess during that period up until the time that you lost your son, you must have
Yeah.
started to develop other ways to start to cope with your emotions. So could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I really do think, I mean, losing Gabriel far and away, there's nothing else that's happened in my life to compare to it in terms of loss or trauma. But, we had other things happen along the way that challenged us in smaller ways. So I felt like if I could say it this way, I probably never said it this way before, but not an immune system, but just began a pattern of being able to respond to situations. It started with, Gabriel was born early. And then when we decided to have a second child, we had a miscarriage. And so, that's a devastating blow, and there's probably a lot of your listeners who have suffered from that, if not even more than one time. And, it's a really hard thing. So back then, again, our faith is, I'll just say this one time to kind of cover it all. Our faith has always been a factor in helping us with that and maintaining a posture of hope. But I think, the practical sides of it is we loved on each other. We talked about it. We didn't just bury how we were feeling about things when we lost, the baby and the miscarriage. And then a couple of tough pregnancies when even my middle son was born. He actually made it full term. We're so excited. And then she ends up in the delivery room, and 12 hours later, just not budging past like a 2 or a 3. Then the epidural wasn't working. So they're trying to give her a C-section, but she can still feel everything. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And ultimately she delivered him. They got it. They finally got the epidural to take. But then I'm in the room with Joel is his name. I'm in there. We cleaned him up, and I'm with the nurse, and it's, such a beautiful moment. This is so cool. And they grabbed me and pulled me back in to where they had her in the waiting room, and she wasn't waking up. She was having a hard time coming out of the anesthesia.
Mhm.
So that happened. And so she obviously ended up coming out of it, and we were fine. But it was just another thing that we kind of had to process through and stay true to our values and just talking things out and those things. And then ultimately, Liam, my youngest, was the craziest of all. We lived in Washington State, and he was born 3 months early. She ended up with full-blown HELP syndrome, which, for your listeners, there's a couple of different pregnancy diseases that can make it really difficult, where they got to take the baby early. The preeclampsia is one, and that's what she had when she had Gabriel. It skipped when we had Joel, but then when Liam came along, it went from preeclampsia to full-blown HELP syndrome, which basically means your major organs are starting to shut down and you're basically dying, really. And so they took him, and he was 1 pound, 14 ounces, spent the next 2.5 months in the hospital. This was during the H1N1 virus. So, we're still in the age of, the COVID pandemic, right? Not as intense as it was, but, it's still there. And a lot of people don't remember the H1N1, but it was very similar in that we were the only two that could even see him during those 2.5 months. His brothers could not. They would literally sit in the waiting room at times for hours, and waiting to see their little brother. And so, so we've been through some stuff. She had a spiral fracture of her femur a few years after that, wakeboarding. So there's been some stuff, Sherry.
Sounds like it. I feel like you could also kind of keep going there, Clint.
I probably could have, I thought hard enough. The funny thing is, though, is, because I've been asked by people who have known us for 20 years plus years, and they're like, man, you guys have been through so much. And I I don't really even think about it that way until I take time to rattle off a few stories or write it down. I'm like, well, maybe there's been a few things. But I think just to your point, and how we were able to function when it came time to try and deal with this incredible tragedy with Gabriel, all of those things definitely helped prepare us, I think, more so as a family. Just the fact that we fought through different things as a family. And then, of course, when he passed away, for anyone out there that's lost a loved one, like, you did with your mom or a child or whatever, I don't want to downgrade that in any way to compare it with those other things. But it definitely gave us at least a base of how we talk things out, how we, continue to just stay true to our values. And I think that ultimately has helped us kind of maintain a steady path over the last few years.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So, Clint, and you'll just mind my dog just a moment because he's enjoying the conversation as well. So, so how do you get back up? I mean, the majority of us, we have these traumas in our life, and they're, I mean, let's face it, life shattering. And so
Yeah.
how do we rebuild that faith, and that faith in life, and that faith in living? And clearly you have to show up for your other sons as well. What
Right.
advice can you share with the audience that helped you overcome?
Yeah. Well, for me, to your point, that was a very astute observation, because that's something you can't forget. We still had two sons and a marriage, that we didn't want to lose our marriage over
Yeah.
this, because we've seen it. So certainly those were two massive motivating factors that not everybody listening is going to necessarily have that as part of it. But for us, it was. And so, for me, especially as a dad, I knew that, as much pain as I was in, that, Gabriel's story ended and we weren't going to get to see him do all the things that we really hoped and dreamed he would do. I still had two more sons that had their dreams and have their life to live. And, the way we walk this out, we're going to go a long way in how they walk out not only the pain of losing their brother, but, as years go on and they get punched in the face with different things as they're living life. So having that as a focal point is definitely a pretty strong motivating factor for most people. Now, I recognize there are some that still do have family and it's just crushing and they have a hard time doing that. And, I think the second thing I wanted to share with you is what they can do, that you don't have to have the first thing. And that is, I found that giving your pain a purpose
Mm,
makes a huge difference. And what I mean by that is, we tell ourselves stories all the time about our life, right? We're the most powerful voice in our lives that we'll ever have.
right.
And so a lot like what I talked about, whether we are going to choose to focus on his death or focus on life, and you mentioned about focusing on life, is that was really part of that same mindset that, listen, if I can tell myself a new story, and that new story would be is I don't have to let this pain cripple me. I don't have to let this pain steal from my future. The pain may still be there, but if I can tell myself a new story and tell the pain where to go, then I can change my life. And so that's, part of what happened for me. It's been with Big Bold Brave, the personal development, obviously the book. For my wife, she discovered she was an artist about a year or so before Gabriel passed away. So it was an amazing discovery. I mean, she's really good. She actually just recently was qualified to come into a pretty large international art show here in Dallas that had artists from all over the world. So when I say it's not just my wife, she's really good too. But that was something that she laid down for a little bit, Sherry. She did. When Gabriel first passed, man, your capacity shrinks for a while, for everybody, I think. And so she put it on the shelf for a little while. But then several months later, she knew that she had to continue to express the fullness of herself. So she started painting again. And it's just been incredible. One, it brings great joy into this house. And then it's really been a blessing to so many people because her story, not her stories, but well, actually her stories too, because every painting has a specific name. It's got a real, specific story about what she was feeling and what she was going through when she created it. So that was awesome. For my son Joel, who's now 18, it was playing football. For my youngest son Liam, who's 13, he's a black belt in martial arts and learning two different martial arts right now. So we had to individually choose, but collectively encourage each other to tell ourselves a different story, tell our pain where to go. And so that meant pursuing our dreams. And, a lot of people, we hear about this kind of stuff, like you lose somebody to cancer and then you become one of the biggest cheerleaders for
Right.
fundraising for that cancer, or you start a foundation. There's a lot of things we could list. And I put a lot of those actually in the book because I really believe that telling your pain where to go and giving your pain a purpose is a path out for a lot of people.
Yeah. And it's so well said, by the way, Clint, and that was just absolutely beautiful. And really reminds me also of my experience when my mom passed as well. And the majority of the choices that we make throughout the day is around avoiding pain and then
Mm-hmm.
seeking pleasure, right? And so
Yeah.
we start to assign certain meanings to that pain, and definitely that meaning oftentimes is dark. It's very painful, and it's something that we want to constantly avoid. And what really comforted me throughout that process was this sudden understanding of exactly what life was, and this
Mm,
realization that she's gone now, but there's going to be a day where I'm also gone. And that made me, in many
yeah,
ways, very grateful for my life. First of all, very
absolutely.
grateful for her because I was lucky to have this type of mom. I had many friends that were calling their moms all kinds of names, and I could never do that to my mom. So I felt so grateful that she got to be my mom. And then just realizing, well, how much time do I have left?
Right.
What are all the things that I still
Right.
want to do in my life? And I really like life suddenly became even more important to me. I started becoming way more intentional with my time, intentional with the people that I spent time with, intentional with making sure that
Yeah.
everything that I did in my life had massive purpose to me. And the purpose was fulfillment. And the fulfillment was helping to impact one person, helping to create a transformation in one person's life. Didn't really matter what it was, but if I could make a difference in one person's life, then it was worth it. And just at that very moment, losing my mom, I was in the room actually when she passed, and I've
Mm.
never felt such an unbelievable energy of love ever in my life. The moment that I
Wow.
actually felt and saw her soul literally leave her body, I've never felt
Mm.
such love. It was overwhelming. It was overwhelming, and
Wow.
they even say that love is actually the true energy of the soul, right? And so
I
I
totally believe
felt
that.
that, and I felt that there was a part of her that just got immediately absorbed into my tissues. And
Mm.
since then, it's been this mission to constantly be grateful for every little thing, and to remember, like every time I go to the graveyard and I visit her, I remember, well, this is where I'm going to end up. Like this is where I'm coming, and it's the most
That's right.
and I'm completely at peace with it. But it's that realization that life is very finite. We don't know when that moment is, and why waste it? If there's things that we want to
Yeah.
do, why waste it? If I'm holding
Yeah.
myself back because I'm worried about being judged, why waste that time? Like who cares what people think anyways, right? If there's something I want to do and I'm so worried about being an imposter because of imposter syndrome, that's a waste of time. It doesn't matter what other people think, right? So I
Absolutely.
think it could definitely be rewritten. And unfortunately, death is a part of life, and it's just something that we have to experience. I think it hurts to see our children go before us, but I think also, like you said, I love so much how you phrase that using your pain to actually almost leverage that purpose that is
Mhm.
actually already within you this whole time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That was so good.
We
All of that
understand
was
each other.
so good.
Yeah.
Well, I don't need to restate any of that, but everything you just said has all been a part of it as well for us. Every single thing you said, and man, it's just, well, I think I'm going to share this because this could help someone. The one thing that I struggled with for probably about first 2 years before I started writing the book and really getting involved, in the personal development space, was I struggled with this idea that I didn't want his loss to become our identity. In other words, I didn't want people to always think, oh, that poor family, that poor dad, that poor mom. And then I just remember one day, this is before I, launched all that stuff. And for me, I just felt like God was speaking to me that day. And it was, this is not your identity, but it is your story, and your story matters. And so that's what I hear you saying too, is like you have so much life to live. And the power of gratitude too. That's another thing you were just talking about. gratitude is a force. I don't think it's a word or some pleasantry that we think of. I think it's an actual energy force. I really do. And I have some stories similar where gratitude just changed the atmosphere, But everything you said, gosh, just so good. And just, for all your listeners, man, your story matters. Your story is going to touch lives. So you can't give up. You can't quit. You can't live small.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what you were saying earlier about this gratitude, this practice of gratitude being a force. You can literally feel it. It is a immediate sensation. The moment that I wake up and I have all these things going on in my life and I just start to turn towards gratitude, which is very difficult, by the way, Clint. Some days it's really
Yeah.
hard to do because
Oh,
you're like,
yeah.
what can I be grateful for? Like this terrible thing is happening. Like how can I possibly be grateful? But then you start with the little things, right? And just as simple as being able to drink this glass of water that I have here on my desk. I started working with an athlete who actually has a hard time swallowing. It's very little
Mm,
things that we don't realize is a gift for us every single day, and it is not our right to have these things. It's not our right to be able to see. It's not our right to be able to speak to each other right now. It's not our right to wake up
yeah.
healthy every single day. It is a gift. And if we start there and we build this
Yeah.
practice, then the moment that something tragic happens, which we should expect to happen in our life, because the way life runs out, it's like the seasons, right? We know there's going to be a winter, and after winter, there's a
That's right.
spring, and there's a fall, and there's a summer. And so this is the pattern of our life. But when that winter is here, we're prepared because we have that foundation of this gratitude practice. And I would just remember coming back to the most difficult challenges of my life and remembering how I overcame them. And that
Yeah.
absolutely strengthens my faith and my gratitude in that I can overcome anything, and it's just another season of life.
Absolutely. Can I share a quick story
Oh
about
my
that?
God, please.
Especially talking about feeling it. So about 3 weeks after Gabriel had passed, one of the anybody who has lost someone in a plane crash, they'll know one of the worst things about it is the NTSB investigation takes almost 2 years. And then in the early couple of weeks or so, or a few weeks, they've got to do the autopsy to see, what was in your system. Did you have some sort of, genetic defect, all these different things. And so we had to move on to do our celebration of life service and other things without cremated remains. I don't mean to be morbid, but it was our only option because of the type of wreck he was in. But we didn't even know when we were going to be getting those. So one day, it was a Wednesday, just a normal Wednesday. We were both at home and the doorbell rings. And so my dog, I have a dog too, by the way. It didn't faze me at all. I have her out back because she's loving the sun right now and it keeps her from barking. But when the doorbell rings, that's her cue. She goes nuts. She's admittedly a very poorly trained dog. And so she's going nuts, and of course I look out, we have one of those privacy windows and it's a guy in a FedEx uniform. So I just kind of Bailey, move. And I step outside, shut the door. So here's a guy in a FedEx uniform and he's got his little device. He's got a package and he's got his little device that we all sign. And before I go to sign it, I look down and I see the box. And the box has what everybody's familiar with, a biohazard sticker on it.
Mm,
And in big, bold red letters, it says cremated remains.
mm,
And we didn't even know they were coming.
mm.
And so I grabbed that box and I went inside and my wife was there. And of course, she asked, "Oh, what did we get?" So we opened it, and pulled out his dust. And we wept really hard, really hard. I don't even remember saying anything. I just remember holding each other. And after some moments where we just, gathered our emotion to some degree, she walked into our master bedroom, probably to go into the bathroom to, clean up her eyes or whatever she was doing. And I was left there alone. And, you know, Sherry, it was right then, that I felt it was my first really major attack, if I could say it that way, that I felt a physical blanket of darkness coming over me. I mean, I literally physically felt it.
Mm.
And it's almost like I could sense that anger,
Right.
depression, like all these things wanted me bad. and were about to take me out, and I felt it. And I just had a lucid moment where I just realized, before, I guess you could say, it was too, and not too late that you could never recover from that later, but not too late for me to go down a major spiral. I just knew I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't check out. And so I began to be grateful.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel grateful at all when I started. As a matter of fact, I really, as I remember it, I kind of mumbled the first things I was grateful for. I was trying to force it, to be honest with you. And then as I did it, this is when that powerful force we're talking about, I began to just, first I was just, I was raising my hands, and, for me, it's just kind of just the way I just defer to God. There's someone higher, there's a higher power than me. And so I was just doing that. And I was like, thank you that I had the opportunity to be a dad. Thank you for Gabriel's life. Thank you that and it started as a mumble, kind of quiet. And then the words got clear. I got louder, a little more like actual conviction that I meant the words began to kick in. And I was thankful for what I did have, including with him and the time we had. And as I did that, Sherry, and I know you've experienced something similar, so I don't have to convince you. I literally felt that heavy blanket completely lift, and it was gone.
Mm.
And I want to point out to your listeners, I'm not talking about the pain.
Right.
The pain didn't lift. I didn't, it wasn't like joyful.
Right.
The pain was still there, but the power of gratitude kept me from going into a really deep pit.
Place. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something I can resonate with. And thank you so much for sharing that story and for being so vulnerable. And, I think the question that I always try to avoid, like, I know that darkness, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I know that when that darkness starts to just overcome you, and it's the darkness of why, like, why did this happen, right? Why did this happen to me? Like, why, and you just get so angry. And the moment I start to get that why, that's where I remember that I have to now practice gratitude. And that's actually the one question that I don't allow to sit in my mind. As soon as I feel that start to come up, and there are moments, because I agree with you, the pain is always there. And I think we need to make that clear. You never get over that pain. The pain is
No.
always there, but it gets easier. You're able to transition from sitting in that pain to shifting it to the purpose. And the purpose is the answer, right? If I'm going to
Yeah.
ask the question why, well, the because is my purpose. And so switching to that space of gratitude of, all right, okay, it was just meant to be, like all of the other things that happened in my life were just meant to be because
Yeah.
of this. And so it's hard, and again, it's definitely something that we just have to expect to always kind of be there, because I think so important for people to who are listening today to know that the pain never becomes comfortable, but we start to become comfortable with that discomfort and start to use that, really, like you said, to funnel that into something that can create
Yeah.
more impact,
Can be a
even for our own
catalyst.
selves, right?
Absolutely. No, what you just said, oh my gosh, again, that's incredibly powerful. And, I have a question to pose to your listeners, because the why question is the question that everybody has, right? And I certainly had it early on a couple of different times, but I'm just going to share how I've been able to put that to rest in my life, because I feel exactly the same as you. Asking why is a really bad question.
Mm.
And so, and here's why, and here's what I would ask, your listeners. What answer is there out there that would make it okay?
Right.
I can tell you in my situation, there isn't one.
Mm.
There is no answer that would suffice the void of not having my son live a very long life and watching him grow. There isn't one. So if there isn't one, why are you letting why cripple you?
Right. That's so powerful. You're a beautiful human being. I've loved this conversation so much with
Thank
you.
you.
We cried together, we've laughed together. You're just, I feel so incredibly connected to you and your story, and I love what you're doing. You're helping so many people, and I think this is such an important conversation. And that's what I love about the podcast, Fall in Love with Fitness. Like, we're talking about death and overcoming death and getting back up and
Yeah.
reassigning a different meaning to such a terrible experience. And why is that so important when it comes to fitness? Because
Yeah.
this is where it's at. It's the inner work. It's the inner work that helps us create the outer transformation. And it was hard. When my mom passed, it was hard. It was hard to get myself to do anything. I didn't want to do anything. I
Yeah.
became so numb, emotionally numb. I couldn't laugh. I couldn't cry. I didn't care about anything. How can I work on my own health and fitness when I'm in that space? And so when I have people on like you who share this powerful message, it's so incredibly beautiful and just so impactful. And I feel so grateful that we had this conversation today and that we connected today, Clint. You are so amazing. So maybe we can direct people to where they can go if they wanted to connect with you, if they wanted to reach you, ask you questions. Where can they do that?
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I feel totally the same way. You have such a light and a love and an energy about you. And I mean, since we started talking, I'm like, I didn't feel, I felt good before we started, but now I feel like I could go run through a wall, so I
Let's
just really
go.
appreciate, yeah, I just so appreciate, who you are and what you're doing. And so thank you for allowing me to share, how they can connect. What, I really want to connect with people. It's not really my goal just to sell books. So what I would love for them to do is if they go to my website, which is bigboldbrave.us, and for the sticklers, yes, I know it's .us, but I believe we don't do anything on this planet, just like this right now. This conversation is powerful because we're collaborating, because it's a give and take, and it's a share, not because I am so wonderful or you are so wonderful,
Right.
like together. So it's bigboldbrave.us, and there it's kind of one-stop shopping. You can get the book. You can, what I'd love for you to do is sign up for an email. I'm actually going to start an email newsletter at the end of this month. It's only going to be once a week. It's going to be brief, just things that bring you value to your life. I'm not going to flood anybody because I hate that kind of stuff. But I want to be able to keep you in the loop. I've got a podcast that I'm working on as well, and you're already on a very short list here. I can tell you that right now,
Love
of
it.
people that I want to bring on that are living the kind of life that I consider big, bold, brave, which is courageous humans, inspiring lives. You made tons of courageous decisions, and you're inspiring lives. So that's what I'd love for them to do. But I know you're in Quebec, right? So we've
Yes.
probably got a lot of international listeners. So go to my website and subscribe so I can keep you up to date. But for those who are international, to buy the book, you'll want to go to Amazon or one of the other online retailers, wherever books are sold, because your shipping is going to be much easier. So do that.
Thank you so much, Clint. I've loved this conversation.
Thank you, Sherry.